Hey, this is AJ. Welcome back to the Handyman process. In today's video, I'm going to be diving a little bit further into bookkeeping, how I do bookkeeping using Novo and a few other tools that I use. If you want to check out some of my other videos on my overall banking process, I'll leave some links in the video description. But in this video, I'm going to dive a little bit further into, okay, I use Novo, I categorize all my transactions. Then what do I do? How do I know kind of where I am? So I'm going to kind of walk you through my process of taking the numbers from Novo, putting them into a spreadsheet, and kind of getting a view of them. So stay tuned. Okay, so let me move my camera over here. So what you're looking at right here is I'm logged into my Novo account right now, and what I've done is if I go back to the dashboard, dashboard kind of gives you a high level overview. If I go into my activity button, and I normally do all this stuff in the app, so if I'm a little slow on touching stuff, just because I don't use the desktop very often. But what I did is I hit on activity, and then I'm going to come in here to financial insights right here where my cursor is. And this is kind of giving me an account cash flow view. I can look at a couple of different things through this view, but right now I'm just going to go year to date. So you kind of get a sense of, okay, year to date, January until April 1st, kind of what did my numbers look like, right? And so what you see is I had $7,000 of income coming in. I spent about $6,000. So I had a net cash flow of about $1,200. This doesn't completely match up to what I have in the bank, right? Because I started off the year with a little bit more money, so on and so on. So the thing with banking, and if this confuses you and it confuses a lot of people, it's always like a snapshot in time of kind of where you are. So you kind of wrap your head around that. But as you see from these numbers, I didn't make a killing this year or so far. I'm usually kind of slow, and as a part-time guy, to me, it doesn't really matter. Right? I've been focusing on some other things, but this gives me a general sense of the money that was coming in and kind of where did it go. And if I wanted to dive a little further into it, I can come back to the transactions tab here and I can start to see things. Like I see I have one here for Mark8. I'm paying currently $69 a month for Mark8. It's on hold, which means the transaction just hasn't hit yet. So I can't go in there. Normally I would go in there and I would categorize it, but since it's not available to me yet, it's not really an option. But I'll use another one, for example. So my son and I just did a job the other day, and let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see this whole thing. So when this transaction hit, it hit today, but we actually did the job over the weekend. I just came in and I categorized it as a sale. I hit sales for this particular transaction. When I do my bookkeeping, I could go and pull the invoice straight from Mark8 if I wanted to. I generally don't do that. I see what invoice it was. I put the invoice number in here as a note. In this case, it was invoice 265. I just type that in. If I really wanted to keep more solid books, I can drag a copy of the invoice in here. But since I'm always, flip flopping between Mark8 and Novo, I just generally don't do that for incoming money. But that's generally an example of one sale coming in. Let me show you an expense, recent expense. Okay, so Lowe's. I went to Lowe's the other day. Hopefully this is a good example. That I put the receipt in here? Yeah, I put the receipt in there. Good. But in this particular case, I went to Lowe's whenever this date was, March 20th. I spent $52.85 there. I came in here, and if you go back and you look at my banking video, it goes a little bit more in depth on how I run business, but I use something called the profit first system. And with that profit first system, I can basically bin my money into different categories so that in this case, I want to make sure that I'm taking the money for this particular expense out of operating expenses. So I categorize it as an operating expense. I came in, I put a note that it's a work order supply. And these two things are pretty big when it comes to taxes at the end of the year or in the spreadsheet view that I'm going to show you in a moment. And then finally, I can come down here and I can click on let me see if it opens up. I can click on the actual receipt. So in this case, if I do have expenses, I go to Lowe's, I generally do take a screenshot of the receipt and then I just upload it. So now I have the full transaction picture here when it comes to my expenses from an audit perspective. But anyway, that's just a general kind of quick overview. it's kind of hard to look at all this stuff, right? You look at all this stuff like, am I making money? Am I losing money? What does it look like month to month? So what I recommend people do is I'm going to come up here. I've come back to the transactions. So I'm in activity, transactions. I can see all my transactions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to my year to date button. So now it's going to filter from the beginning of this year up until today's date. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit this download the CSV button. And what it's going to do, it's going to download it to an Excel spreadsheet, essentially. Since I'm running on an Apple computer right now, when I click on this, it's going to open up in Apple's. Let me drag this over. So what comes out is this. In my case, it gets downloaded to Apple's Sheets, but I don't like using Apple Sheets. So what I do is I take that data and I then import it into Google Sheets, right? A lot of people are familiar with Google Sheets, and I am going to just mess around with some stuff here so that I can see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm in Google Sheets right now, and this data comes in kind of raw like this, right? And I did a few things here before the presentation started, but the data comes in like this, right? You have your date column, description, amount, note, if there's a check number, and a category. So this is how the raw data comes in. But I know I want to manipulate and do some things. So if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that in my day job, I'm kind of a data scientist or an Excel geek. So I know how to work a spreadsheet. That's why I have no problem with Novo. If I'm going through some of this stuff right now and you're just like, oh my God, he's a nerd, feel free to work with your bookkeeper, give them a copy of this. They'll understand all this stuff. But if you're like, I could figure this out, then continue to watch and follow along. So the first thing I do is I know that I want to see my money in a monthly basis, right? So right now, if I look at my sheets over here, it's all in a date format. So the first thing I generally do is I come in here, I'm going to insert a column to the left. It's going to give me a blank column. I'm going to call this column month. Then I'm going to come down here, and it's real simple to convert this date into a month. All I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the equal sign. I'm going to start typing month. It's already going to recognize it for me. I'm just going to click it. And it's basically looking at this cell and putting the month there. Here's a little shortcut trick. If I just double click this circle right here, you have to have the plus sign. So I'm going to double click the circle with the plus sign. Now it puts all the months all the way down. So now I know all these transactions were in the month of April, March, so on and so on. So that's great. This is the starting data, but it's still a little wonky, right? I can go in here and I could insert a filter. I've already done that. So if you wanted to filter certain categories, you can see certain categories if you wanted to take a look at. And one note here, you'll notice there's a bunch of blank fields here, and this is part of my process, right? I try to stay on top of my stuff, but sometimes I forget. I don't leave notes. Sometimes that's intentional and sometimes it's not. So like this Google domains, right? I should went in there and typed a note that this is for advertising. I pay this every month. But the more important thing is the category here. So let's look at an example. It's this. So I received money via Square for a job I did recently. This should be categorized as sales, but I didn't do it, right? So what I would do is I would go back to this transaction, which is 150.45. I would come back over here. I'm just going to type in, and it's going to show this transaction. I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I didn't categorize it properly as sales for some reason. I'm going to go ahead and categorize that transaction. Same type of thing. I'm going to put, I don't remember the exact invoice off the top of my head for this one, but I'm going to put in XXX right now because I'll come back to figure out what that is. I'm going to add that note. And now next time I download my spreadsheet, I'll have that information kind of in there. So that's one thing I do with my spreadsheet is I go and I look at all the empty spots, especially, to be honest with you guys, I normally do this at the end of the year. I just go through it all at the end of the year if there's any blank spots. Because as I scroll through, you'll see I don't have a whole lot of blank spots, right? There's some stuff here I'll explain in a minute that blank for a specific reason. But that's generally the first thing I do, right? To help remind myself, oh, I need to go back there. I need to clean up my stuff a little bit. But let's talk about, now that I have this raw data, what do I do with it? So what I like to do is I like to create something called a pivot table where I can kind of come in here and see certain types of data the way that I want to see it. This is just an example. I'm going to delete this for right now, and I'm going to show you how I create a pivot table. So a pivot table is nothing more than taking data and then pivoting off of it. And by pivoting off of it, I mean you can twist the way that you see different things, bits of information. It'll make a little bit more sense once I create the pivot table. So to create a pivot table, I'm going to highlight all the data. There's shortcuts and different ways to do this, but I'm going to assume that most people don't know that. So what I did is I highlighted all the data, including the column headers, right? Date, month, all the way down to the bottom. Now I'm going to come up here to the insert button. If you're using true Microsoft Excel, the buttons will be similar, maybe a little bit different. There's different ways to do it. I'm just giving a demonstration within Google Sheets. But if I hit insert, I come down to pivot table. It's going to ask me where do I want to put it. I'll go ahead and I'll put it in the new sheet. I'm going to hit the create button. And now it gives me a blank canvas, right? And what it's doing is it's saying you can look at rows, or maybe it's better look at it. You can look at rows this way. You can look at columns this way. You can look at the bits of information down here in the values field. So the first thing I want to do is I want to pull in that month field that I just created, right? So you remember I came in here, I created this column called month, and I want to use that as a column. So I'm going to come over here. This is going to give me a list of all the different bits of data that I had, the same sheet over here. So you're looking at date, month, description. It's matching this, right? Date, month, description, so on and so on. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose the month and I'm going to drag it over underneath columns here. And as soon as I do that, you're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4. That represents the columns. The second thing I want to do is the category I want to drag over to the rows field. So I'm going to take the categories, I'm going to drag it over to the rows field. Now I have all my different categories that are essentially drop down boxes within Novo. And then the final thing is I want to see the dollar values in here. So I'm going to grab the amount and I'm going to bring it down to the values field here. Once I do that, you'll start to see where my numbers lie, right? So if I go back to the Novo app, what you'll see here is I have a positive cash flow of 458.65, and that should jive with quarter to date. We'll go to year to date, 458.65. Yeah, so it matches up, right? Sometimes it could be a little off. Sometimes there's issues, right? Reconciliation issues. So if it was off, you can go in and figure out, hey, why isn't this lining up? And this is the nice thing about using a pivot table to do this, right? So right now on the surface, I can look, okay, I spent $159 in advertising, $56 in business insurance, home office, material supplies, so on and so on down the line. But yeah, maybe I want a little bit more detail, right? Maybe that's not getting it for me. So I have more detail in the form of the description and notes columns that I downloaded previously. So if I go back to my pivot table, let's say I wanted to look, drag my description underneath the category. So now it explodes out a little bit, right? So first of all, I see, okay, I have a bunch of things that I haven't categorized, right? This also helps with the going back and cleaning things up. Hey, how come I didn't categorize this? How come I didn't categorize that? I can start to go in and I can clean these things up, right? I can go in and say, okay, I spend $150. That's the one that we just the example that we just looked at. So I can go in there and clean those up so that they start to fall under their proper categories. Um, and as I go down the line here, you'll see, okay, this is where I'm spending money for advertising. But look at this one here. It says Wealthfront Checking, right? This is my personal banking account. I'm like, why do I have advertising money under Wealthfront Checking? I don't remember that, right? Well, that's where my notes come in. So I can bring my note over here and go back up here. And I apologize. I know this is probably an eye chart as I'm walking through this stuff. And if you're getting any value out of this content, go ahead, let me know. If you're like, hey man, it's too much, let me know. But what I just did is I pulled the note in here. Now I have this note underneath my Wealthfront Checking, and I can look at it, right? So it's, oh, Facebook ads. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I ran an ad that particular month because I was trying to sell some jobs for cabinet hardware installation, and I haven't updated my Facebook account to charge to Novo. It's still charging my personal account. So what I did is I reimbursed myself to the tune of $29.99 um, back to my account because I basically use my personal money to do this, which is a bad habit, but I traced it. I since gone back. I've updated my Facebook account, so that shouldn't be an issue kind of going forward. But as I go through this, you can start to see, okay, I see where he's bookkeeping all of his business insurance, his home office stuff, so on and so on. Let me pull the notes back out of here. And just as easy as I pulled these things in, I can pull them out or I can just X out of them, right? So um, I'm going to X out of that. So now I'm just back to, actually, I think I screwed a couple things up. So now I'm just back to category and description. And these little drop down boxes here can help me, um, tighten up things a little bit here. So you start to see again, where's all my money going? This is where it's particularly going in this case. And then if I wanted to say, hey, I just want to look at one particular month, you can drag this, any field that you want really, you can drag down to the filter area here. So if I drag months down the filters, and now let's just say, hey, I just want to look at month 4, right? The month that I'm in right now, which I shouldn't see much. And I don't. And what I see is, okay, I got a couple of things. I made a little bit of money in the terms of Square. I got an invoice that I closed out over the weekend. I got a referral reward. So one of the great things about Novo for both you and me is if you watch one of my videos and you sign up for Novo, I get $40 and you get $40 as well, which I think it's unheard of in terms of marketing. So every once in a while, somebody will sign up, and I really appreciate that. So I got $40 in my account, and this individual, it doesn't tell me their name; it just says their first and last initial. They got $40. So TR, if you're watching, I appreciate it. Hopefully you like Novo. If you're watching this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up or drop a comment down below. But then the other final things I have are Mark8. Again, I'm paying $69.95 a month for Mark8. That's the base package, plus a couple additional add-ons and then a Google domains. So using this pivot table format, I can do whatever I want. I can kind of see where I'm at any given moment, and it kind of works for me. Like I mentioned, this isn't my primary income. I got a day job where I'm making decent money, so this is my additional money, if you will. That's why, as I dig through my books, I'm not making a killing in this stuff, right? Because I don't need to make a killing, but I do make enough to kind of cover some things, and I do use a lot of tax strategy. I try to do dual use um, certain things. So if I'm driving to a certain store, I'll use that mileage. I'll also do a personal errands if I can uh, buy. Like I have a desk right behind me here that I can use for both personal things and for business. I just you know um, categorize it accordingly, and I'll refer to your CPA on how to categorize transactions and make sure they're legit. But those are my books kind of in a nutshell, really quickly. I'm going to turn this filter back off and kind of go back to the larger stuff. So if you're kind of curious of how I do it, this is what I do. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I generally don't do it at this level often. I usually only do it a couple times a year when it's getting down to tax time because, let me log into this real quick. Let me pause for a second while I log into this. All right, so we're logged back in. So I mentioned that I don't use a spreadsheet very often. I don't sit here and look at this very often because what I do is I look at this. I come down here to my reserves box in my Novo account, and I kind of know where I'm sitting in any given moment, right? Based on where I am right now, I have $732 set aside for taxes. I'll probably write a check to the or send some money to the IRS here shortly in the tune of $732. I have $302 that I can dedicate to operating expenses. So that's enough to cover my monthly expenses, my kind of my fixed monthly expenses, and I'll also dip into that for work order supplies. And then if I wanted to on any given day, I can pull out $1,099 for me personally to spend. So by managing my money this way, I kind of always know where I sit, right? And a traditional accountant may be going, "What about your income statement? What about this statement?" Like I don't operate like that. I know how to do that kind of stuff, but it doesn't. I don't want to waste my time on that kind of stuff. If you have a big operation, that's a big deal, right? It's a more important thing. But if you're a single solo operator, and let's say this is your bread and butter, right? You're doing this day in and day out. Like this would be a little bit more important to you. Maybe you break out you add additional reserves, right? So instead of just owner compensation, maybe you got a rent account or whatever you want to have. You can have something like you can have a bunch of reserve accounts within Novo to set your money aside. But this forces the discipline, right? If you're disciplined with it, right? So if you have money set aside for taxes, either don't touch that account and only send taxes, or take it out and put it in a whole separate account like the profit first system says, and do it that way. Same thing with operating expenses. I'm guilty of this. You might be guilty of this as well. Like, I'll dip into owner compensation sometimes to pay operating expenses, and it's a bad habit, right? It's not a habit I want to get into. If I wanted to be more disciplined, I would either increase the operating expense account or just not go buy those tools sometimes that I like to buy. And I think we're all kind of guilty of that. Anyway, this is kind of how I do it, a little bit more in detail. If you're wondering why I don't use the Marcate app to do this, I'll tell you. So if you go to the expenses tab within Marcate, right, and you try to record an expense, you got to do it manually. Now you can go in here for recurring expenses. I could put my um, insurance and other fixed expenses in here, the Marcate stuff, and I can set that on autopilot, and that's great. But the majority, like 70, 80, 90% of my expenses are purchases at Lowe's or Home Depot. And I don't want to go in here every time I do that and upload the thing. I'd rather just do it straight from the app where the money's caught and be done with it. So that's why I don't do that. The second thing I don't like about tracking money in Marcate is 90 something percent of my transactions, my sales are done via a Square integration where somebody's using a credit card. And when they do that, what happens is there's two issues. One of them is it just shows you the overall charge that I charge the customer. So let's say it was $400. It doesn't take out the fee, the processing fee. So the numbers get off, right? I would have to go in there and add another expense to reduce the amount of money I receive by that processing fee. And the other thing is I receive a lot of tips, and tips get screwed up in here. So by going straight to Novo, I know for a particular transaction, if we go back to a recent one for this particular transaction, if I go back to my Novo account, I'll see that I got paid, I think it was like 260. Actually, I charged the customer $225. They gave me an additional tip, and then Square took their cut out of that. And then at the end of the day, when all that stuff washes out, the tip minus the cut and everything, I got paid 261.87, right? So I know that's the money that hit my bank account, and I can track it, and that's just what works for me better. So I know I've kind of been a little bit all over the place in my, my explanation here. Sometimes it's hard to explain this kind of stuff. So maybe this is just more of a teaser about what I do and how I do it and how I extract stuff and bring it over to spreadsheets and mess around with it over there. So hopefully this is adding a little bit of value. It's probably brought up a few questions for you. If you have questions on why did I do this, why did I do that, how did I do this, do I have a template for doing this kind of stuff? The answer is maybe, it depends. I need to hear some questions back from you on, maybe where you want me to dive a little further into, or do you want me to slow down my New York talking? I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to slow down the speed at which I talk. But to be honest with you, I generally do this stuff off the cuff. I do generally one take and kind of walk it through. So if you want me to deep dive into something else and get very specific on that, I can definitely do that. So just let me know. Anyway, that's the end of today's video. If you're getting any value out of this, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Let me know. Drop a comment down below and stay tuned for the next one. Appreciate it.